Good morning, church. Isn't it great to be here? Great to be part of the Lord's church, anyway. And thank you for welcoming me into your home once again. And once again, we are joined by our good friend Milo. Milo, you're a ways back there. What's going on this morning? Social distancing. Well, okay then. Well, thank you, Milo. I appreciate you working hard to keep all of us safe, because we wouldn't want you to infect anyone in their home. Well, good morning, church. Isn't it great to have Milo with us? Maybe someday he'll join us as a member. I want to go ahead and get into the gospel this morning. A story that comes to us from the life of Christ, close to the end of his time among us. When he's teaching and he's getting asked really hard questions, he's cleansed the temple, ticked off a bunch of people, and so they're trying to catch him in a mistake. And he silences everybody, and so one less bite of the apple comes to us from a Pharisee that they send forward, a lawyer. The text says, "But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. 'Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?' And he said to them, 'You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all of the law and the prophets.'" Isn't that like Jesus? You ask him for one thing and he gives you two. But the thing that he gave us there, it's a foundation stone on which you can build your entire life, the whole time that you have to live in this broken place. We live in a world that is filled with uncertainty and with challenge and difficulty, where all kinds of bad things happen. And sometimes it can be hard to know what's the right thing to do. One of the reasons that it just stands out so starkly to us when we see an act of heroism and bravery is because so often those people, they just seem to know what the right thing to do is. And of course, if you sit down and you were to talk to them, they'd tell you that most of the time they were just acting on impulse. They weren't thinking. They were just doing what they knew they had to do. They had to. It was the right thing to do. About 19 years ago, it was May 15th, in 2001, when this train that you see right there went on a little bit of an adventure. See, that's the CSX 888. It was also called the Crazy 8, and I suspect it's because of this adventure that it went on. This was a train in Ohio, and it was in the yard, and it needed to be moved from one line to another. So a conductor gets in, and he's, or an engineer or whoever it is that drives the train. I don't know the titles, but he gets in and he's moving the train, and he looks out ahead of him and he sees that one of the track relays has been misset. And he's still got time. He can climb down out of the train and go and reset that switch. He's not supposed to leave the train, but if he doesn't get down and fix the switch, he's the only one who can do it. There's nobody else around to ask to do it. If he doesn't do it, the train's going to roll, and there's no way to stop it before it gets to the switch. And he'll have to back the train up, and that's going to make for a horrible morning for him. So he climbs down out of the train and goes and resets the switch. He had set, or at least he had believed that he had set, the switch so that it would the train would continue to coast, but it wouldn't be under power. Whether he actually did that or not isn't known. What is known is that if it had been set that way, it fell into power, or perhaps he hadn't set it that way, and off that train went. It went along from Toledo south toward Columbus on a 65-mile journey. racing south. Now, it wasn't going terribly fast. It reached speeds of like 65 miles an hour. But it's still fast enough to blow through the attempts to derail it. The thing was carrying massive amounts of toxic chemicals, very volatile, explosive toxic chemicals that would release really dangerous gases. And if it made it to Columbus or even to the populated areas, it would have killed a lot of people if it had derailed. And an unmanned train is very wont to do that. It was a pretty scary situation. But there were two gentlemen who were driving in a train, and they got into a siding to let that unmanned train pass. They detached from the load that they were carrying, and then they chased after the train in reverse, hooked up to the train, and slowed it down until the train could be stopped. Now, if you watch movies, you may recognize this story as the story behind the movie Unstoppable. Unstoppable follows very much those events. It changes it from Ohio to Pennsylvania, and it changes it from a 65-mile-an-hour train to an 80-mile-an-hour train, and it changes the hazards that they face. I'm not sure school children were ever actually in danger in the actual events, but, it makes for a better movie. But it follows very closely the heroism of the two men who decided to risk their lives to save others. In that movie, Denzel Washington and Chris Pine are these two men who are looking at this situation and going, we could die. If we try to do this and it goes badly, we could die. I don't want to ruin the movie for you. It's an amazing movie, and I highly recommend that you watch it. But in the scene that you see on the screen right here, they're having the argument about whether or not to chase down the train. Do we do that? Because if the train derails and we're chasing it, then we're going to be a wreck on a wreck, and we're going to die too. Do we do it? Do we not? What do we do? Well, what they do is they chase after the train. They risk their lives to save strangers. And they could have died. And I'm not going to tell you whether or not they do. Watch the movie. It's a little rough around the edges, but it's a great movie. But why would anyone do that? Why would anyone risk their lives for strangers? Why would they put themselves in such obvious high-risk situations? A train moving really, really fast and out of control, and things could go really badly at any moment. Why would they risk life, limb, injury, and even death for people they don't even know? Well, the answer to that question is really pretty straightforward. Because it's the right thing to do. I mean, you just know it when you see them doing it. When you read about the actual events of the CSX triple or quadruple eight, the Crazy Eight train, when you read about those events, and you hear about their heroism, you admire them because they did the right thing, and and they know that they did the right thing. They put themselves at great risk because other people were at great risk, and they could do something about it. It was the right thing to do. But that doesn't really answer the big question, does it? Because the big question that overshadows that question is, how do we know it's the right thing to do? How do we ever know? How do we ever know what the right thing to do is? In these huge situations where black and white are just stark and there is no gray, thousands of people may die unless I act. And I might engage myself in great risk, but I just need to. I've got to do this. It just seems obvious, doesn't it, in those big, stark moments. But day to day, as I live my life, how do I know what the right thing to do is? What is the right thing? The answer is that the right thing to do is the right thing. I know that seems kind of silly, right? That doesn't seem like an answer either. Let me see if I can unpack it. The Greek word that we translate with some words that we use to describe doing the right thing is dikaiosune. Dikaiosune translates variously as righteousness and as justice. Those two words both are translatable from that single Greek word. The word for righteousness usually means uprightness, being a person who does what is right myself. It's about organizing my own life so that I do what is right and good. I'm a person who does, if I'm a righteous person, I'm not a person who does what is bad, even if I might want to. There's never been a perfectly righteous person. Well, there's been one, right? But none of us are perfectly righteous people. But a person who is striving after dikaiosune is a person who is striving after righteousness. They want to organize their life so that it's well ordered, and what they're doing is the right and the good thing. The other word that we might use to translate dikaiosune is justice. And justice is a socially well-organized life, or actually, justice isn't about a life. It's about a group of lives. It's about a well-ordered and well-organized society where we know how to come together and be good to one another, so that we secure each other's good. We make sure that no one else is mistreated by me. I don't push other people down, and no one is left behind or left out. A well-organized society is a society that has dikaiosune. I will suggest that you really can't have one of these aspects without the other. If you really want to have a society that is just, it's going to need to be made up of people that are righteous. And if you want to be a righteous person, you're not going to be able to do that if you ignore other people. The person who asks Cain's wrong-headed question, am I my brother's keeper, is a person who has lost sight of justice, but they've also lost sight of righteousness. You can't be righteous unless you are also just. But what do we mean by justice? Well, that's a big debate going on right now in our society. There are two main political parties in America, and they have two very different definitions when they use that word. What do we mean by just? On the one hand, in our society, we tend to mean that what justice has to do with is having a fair and equitable system, one where the balances are well built, so that you don't have to fix things for other people. You just need to make sure that the system is set up properly. And if the system is set up properly so that everyone is free, everyone has an equal opportunity to things, you don't really worry all that much about outcomes. You worry about opportunities. Make sure that things are fair at the starting line. And so you make sure that the balance is a fair balance. But you don't worry about what people put into the weights of the balance so much. So you're not worried about unequal distributions of wealth, or you're not worried about unequal outcomes. You know, if one person's life is really successful and another person really struggles, well, that's actually justice, maybe. That's one view of justice. Then there's another view that says, well, yeah, but the scale is a human institution, that we set up the balance, and because we're flawed, so are the scales, and we need to work to correct them. We need to make sure that everybody has not just a fair shot, but fairness needs to run all the way through, and especially for those who have some disadvantage, maybe we need to be more fair to those folks. Because after all, otherwise they'll be hurt, and we need to take care of society's victims. Every society has got them. One view of justice is going to say that we need to preserve the rights of individuals. Make sure that nobody's inalienable human rights are taken away by an act of force by the majority or the government. That shouldn't be done to people. The other perspective is going to say that governments are always oppressive, societies are always oppressive, and we need to be working to correct those. And this debate goes on and on. Those two things are just about as far apart as they can get. But that's just the dominant themes in our society. You want to see a really, really good teacher? This man's name is Michael Sandel, and he is far and away the best teacher I've ever seen. You can find Michael Sandel on YouTube. He has a series of, I think it's 13 lectures. It might be 26 lectures, but if it is 26, they're arranged an hour long, and it's 2 lectures. I don't know, but they're wonderful. It's a class that he teaches. He's a Harvard professor. He's written a really great book called Justice, in which he explores different perspectives on what justice is. I will tell you, this guy is an absolute master teacher. He teaches in a room filled with like 1,500 students. This massive hall that is on Harvard's campus. And he leads discussion in a room that size. He'll have mic runners who he goes out and he'll ask a poll question and he'll get support for one position, and then he'll ask another question, he'll give support for another side, and then he'll say, now I need somebody who was in support of both of those things. Explain how it is that you can hold that position. And someone will come to the microphone and talk, and he'll have a debate, and he'll say, okay, I need someone else, and he'll get that person, he'll have those two. Master teacher. He is really amazing. In his class, he explores several different perspectives on justice. What is justice? He'll lead you through things like the ethical conundrum of the trolley car. Have you ever heard about this one? Say you're in a trolley car and it's rocketing down the track, and you see ahead of you that it's out of control, and you see ahead of you that there are 5 workmen working on the track. But on the side track, there's just one person. There is no empty track. One way or another, somebody is going to die. But do you pull a lever that will cause you to switch tracks? If you do, then the one person dies and the 5 live. If you don't, the 5 are going to die and the one will live. What do? That's a hard one. If you don't know anything about their lives, what if the one is a murderer and the 5 are all, saints? What do you do? How do you know what to do? Do you involve yourself in such a circumstance? What's the right thing to do? It's the reason for that little thought experiment. And it leads into the concept of utilitarianism, which is John Stuart Mill's theory that the only way you can tell what is the right thing to do is you add up the number of people who are happy. And if there's a number of people who are happy, that's the right thing to do. The greatest good for the greatest number of people, or the least suffering for the greatest number of people. That's how you find out what is right or wrong. Utilitarianism is just math equations, and it's really pretty gross. What if you're having 60,000 Romans celebrating the death of just 5 Christians as they're fed to lions? And those 5 Christians, they kind of get a raw deal. But if the 60,000 Romans that are in the stadium are ecstatic enough, is that fair? Utilitarianism wouldn't be able to figure that out. A later version of it might mess with it some, but is that a good measuring tool? Or then maybe there's the libertarianism where you belong to yourself, and any taxation is slavery because you're taking away someone's well-being. Their life is invested in their goods, so their money is just an expression of who they are, and to take it away is the same as coming in and taking their labor, taking maybe their finger. Or maybe it's all about the free market and the invisible hand will guide things to justice. If you just trust the free market and let it do its thing, everyone ends up satisfied because nobody makes a purchase that they don't want and nobody sells what they don't want. And everything will be good and fine and dandy. Or maybe you get John Rawls' perspective of fairness, where you just try and arrange things so that they're fair, especially for the least well-off who cannot defend or protect themselves. You need to make sure that it's fair for them. Or maybe Aristotle, that ancient thinker, maybe his view is better, where he says that things should be arranged to their proper ends. So if your proper end is to be a king, you ought to get to be king. And if your proper end is to be a slave, if that's all you're good for, then you ought to be the very best slave that you can be. Or maybe it's Immanuel Kant, who would say that you can never lie, even in the protection of someone's life. If a murderer comes knocking at the door and says, "Do you know where my desired victim is?" And you know good and well they're hidden in your closet, you can't say, "No, I have no idea." Now, you could say, "I saw him in the park earlier," as long as you had seen them in the park earlier. And if they draw the wrong conclusion and they run off chasing them, all of these are different views of justice. Seeking the right thing to do. None of them agree. For instance, John Rawls and Milton Friedman couldn't be farther apart. They are opposites, and they both would look with some horror at John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism. None of them look at Aristotle and treat him like he makes much sense. How do we find our way to the right thing? And incidentally, the one person that Michael Sandel never touches on, which kind of amazes me, is kind of the first person to ever try and explore the definition of justice, and that's Plato. You see an image of him here on the screen, and I think he knew that he was going to be left out of Michael Sandel's lectures, because just look at how sad the poor guy is. I mean, he's clearly brokenhearted. He wrote an entire book called The Republic, wherein he explored diakosune. And he said, basically, that if you look at an individual person and try to determine what's right for that individual, that's kind of hard. But if you look at an entire city-state and you arrange the city-state so things are happening according to their purposes, and you look at how can I best arrange the city-state, what's true in the macro is true in the micro. And so if you look at a city or a country or a nation, and if it's well-ordered, then the individual will be well-ordered too. And well, that's pretty good thinking for a person, for a man, for a human. He does end up making some pretty weird, bizarre statements in the Republic. He shreds family all to pieces. And if you're a woman, I don't think you'd much like, I think it's book 7. It might be book 6. Frankly, it's kind of gross. The things that he can... How are we to know when we look at all of these options that lay out in front of us as human beings try to figure out what is the right thing to do? The place where you end is kind of directionless. You listen to this voice, you go that way. You listen to that voice, you go this way. And what am I supposed to do? How do I find my way to what is good? And that is just looking at justice. And the thing that I just explored with you over the last several minutes is the concept of the social aspect of diakosune. I didn't even touch on the concept of righteousness. How do I know that I'm a good person? All of the theories that I put in front of you, and I mean literally all of them, with the possible exception of Aristotle, who was a pagan and paid some attention to the gods, but frankly, not a lot. All of them are somewhat like trying to build a big castle, a beautiful cathedral, and doing it on the ocean. Building anything on the waves is really not going to work out. It just doesn't. It can't, because there's nothing solid to build upon. The fact that all these various theories of justice, both what's obvious in our own society and what shows up when you really study it and dig down deep into it and try to dig into all the various thinkers that have been around for the last 2,000 years or so, or more, 2,500 years, 3,000 years, looking into even the Code of Hammurabi and trying to figure out what is right, what is good, what is just. You find all kinds of similarity. There are things that it's very clear that's evil, but there's also all these different approaches, all these different theories. And I'm going to tell you that what I've seen that's common to all of them is that they're trying to build without any solid ground. If you actually want to build a structure, then you need a solid rock on which to build. And any theory of diakosune, any theory of justice and righteousness that does not pay close attention to the nature of God is a theory of justice that is doomed to fail before it begins. We cannot secularly build justice. We can't do it because there is no objective standard of justice against which we can measure everything. In order to really know what is right and what is good, we have to get to know the nature of God. We need to figure out who he is. And the more you get to know him, the more shockingly unlike a human being God is. We are like him in so many ways. We have the great capacity for reasoning, for figuring things out and knowing things. These are all God-like attributes. No other creature has the capacity for reasoning. There's some problem solving that goes on in the animal kingdom. Yes, okay, crows can drop rocks into water to lift the water level to the point where they can drink it. And that almost shows a kind of thought that is pretty amazing for a creature of such a small mind. But there is no William Shakespeare, no poetry ever written by a crow. Ants are amazing architects in one sense of the word. They build amazing, beautiful structures, but not one of them has ever carved the Venus. None of them have carved the David. It was a human being that did that. Because we are like God in our capacity for reasoning and for creativity and for our ability to love and our desire for justice. But when you come to see God as he truly is, in the nature and the person of Jesus Christ, and in the revelatory work that God does through Israel as he shows himself and his nature, you see somebody who is so unlike us. When I was a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, my family and I traveled up to Washington, D.C., and we got to take a tour of the national monuments that are there on the mall in the D.C. area. And, the thing is that all of those monuments, you know what they're all to? They're all to wars. We were being led around by a park ranger, and I commented on that, and he said, well, yeah, war is the natural state of mankind. That sits on me to this day with such a heavy weight. Because, folks, in the broken, cursed world in which we exist, God presents himself as a holy warrior against evil and against idolatry and against everything that binds up the hearts of humans and turns them against him. He goes to war against that. But imagine before the creation happens, is there anything about God that is like that? Does he demonstrate to you anything of a warlike nature? God in his nature is completely unlike us in ours. The reason that we are so perplexed about what is the right thing to do is because we have sold our birthright Like Esau for porridge, we have given up our nature. As creatures that bear the image of God, we are meant to be like him. And he never wonders about what the right thing to do should be. And we, in all our perplexity, run around trying to figure it out. What do I do? No. The truth is that the Greek word diakosune, whether people who used it in the ancient world or not knew this, what that word does is it describes the nature of God. What he would do is what we should do. And what he rejects, we also ought to reject. And diakosune is that. It is the rejection of personal unrighteousness. It is the choice to do what is right and what is good for myself and out of myself. Coming out of me should be good things. And it is the well-settled society where society comes together in beauty. Why? Because God is a society. He is a trinity of persons who all love one another. And if we want to know what we ought to look like, we look to God. And we see, the more we learn about his nature, the more we see what our nature is meant to be. And when we know what we're meant to be, we know what we ought to do. God says this to us very straightforwardly. What does he expect of us? He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? That's what he expects of us. Well, yes, but how do I know what justice is? I mean, I listen to this myriad of voices, and they all tell me that it has to do with redistribution of money. No, it has to do with preserving rights. No, it has to do with overthrowing oppression. Look, it probably has to do with all those things. But what it really has to do with is coming to know my God. The reason that last line is in there, walk humbly with your God, is that if you're going to have a hope of knowing how to do the first two, it's going to be because you have come to know your God. As you know who he is and how he treats people, as you look to the example of Jesus Christ, you know what to do. Our society is largely ignoring God. No wonder it's so perplexed about what the right next best thing is. How do you possibly hope to know justice if you don't know the one who is justice? God has told us what justice is as he has self-described. Like we look to the law of Moses, not as a way of obtaining our salvation, but as a way of coming to know who God is. When Micah says, he has told you, O man, what is good, that is very likely a reference to the law. Well, if I look at the law and I look at it and I say, well, I'm going to use that to manage my broken heart. My sinful heart wants to do things it shouldn't do, but I'll use the law and I'll make sure that I'm a good person on my own by using that thing. Well, good luck with that. Your heart is disposed against you. You're not going to do very well. But if I look at that thing and I'm saying, let me get to know who God is, because what God is telling me in this law is, if I were one of you, if I were you, these are things that I would do. I would make sure that I do this. And if I were you, here are things that I would not do. I wouldn't do that. So you don't do them either. Well, as I read the law that way, I come to see the beautiful heart of my God. And he really has told us what is good, because he's told us about himself. And he is good. And so the one who walks with God is led to goodness. What they're led to is love. The law is fulfilled by love. Paul will say this. He says, owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is a fulfilling of the law. Paul is telling us a great mystery here. He is telling us, like, the way that you make sure that you don't hurt other people, and the way that you make sure that you take care of other people, and the way that you make sure that you are in a good society, and the way that you make sure that you are a good person in all of that comes down to love. You must love. If I love someone who is hungry, what do I do? If I love someone who is naked, how do I act? If I love someone who is being mistreated and pushed down, don't I flare up with indignation for them? Don't I want to take their part and take their side? Don't I? And if I love everyone everywhere, do I ever really have to wonder what the right thing to do is? If I love people in a city far away, strangers, where a train is rocketing towards them, unstoppable, speeding at them and it's carrying what will be their death. When it derails from the train and those things explode, it's going to kill them all. If I can do anything about it, is there any question about what the right thing to do should be? Well, of course they're not. Love always knows how to answer the question. Now, we usually don't like the answer because love demands so much of us. It costs so much to love. It's a heavy burden. Other people's needs have to be met. I have to care for other people. I have to take care. I have to go out of... I can't just look out for number one. I can't live asking Cain's question. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, of course I am. Because I'm a Christian and I'm guided by love. And not just any definition of love either, because it's very easy to define love in such a way that I think that what love is about loving me. You know, if I enjoy you, I'll love you back. How does the Christian define love? The Christian defines love by the cross. The obedient love of God that drove Jesus into the redemptive act for humanity. The wondrous love of Jesus for all of humanity that would impel him to come here at all and then to go and do what he very definitely did not want to do so that you and I might be saved. That is the kind of love into which we are called. If you want to know what the right thing to do is, then love God. The more that we love God, the more that we don't have to ask this question. The more that we set God before ourselves, the more that we know the answer. What is the right thing to do? That's why Jesus would say this. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. It is the first and greatest commandment. See, I have to love him if I'm going to know him. And if I'm going to be able to obey everything else that he's told me, frankly, all of it is eclipsed by this. Coming to know his character will guide me into obedience to the law. And he will guide me. In fact, he will empower me. He will transform me so that obedience is fulfilled in me because of my transformed nature. If I love him, he will lead me to all other loves. And then I will obey the second. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commands depend all of the law and the prophets. What God has revealed to us about what is the right thing to do is himself. Love him, and all other things take care of themselves. Now, you may find yourself doing crazy things, climbing into a train that could derail, and you could die. But you know you're doing the right thing. And when you live a life that is doing the right thing, well, you find all other answers really take care of themselves. Well, church, I think Milo has been somewhat convicted by that message about doing the right thing. Milo, you've come forward in the rose. I appreciate you still maintaining that distance, but what's going on? Well, that is very encouraging. So I have now had a sermon in my career that motivated the entire congregation that was present to come forward. Thank you, Milo.